On behalf of the California ISO, I'd like to welcome you to the Interconnection Process Enhancements 2021 Phase 1 Initiative meeting to discuss the Data Transparency Matrix, which was posted on March 29th. My name is Elisandra Casillas, representing the Stakeholder Affairs Group here at the California ISO, and I will be facilitating today's meeting. And I'm also joined by Jason Foster, Key Management Manager. This presentation and other materials related can be found on the initiative webpage. Next slide, please. Some housekeeping reminders. This call is being recorded and the video file will be posted on the initiative webpage for information and convenience purposes only. The recordings and any related transcriptions should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. The meeting is structured to stimulate dialogue and engage different perspectives. Please keep comments professional and respectful. Also, please try and be brief and refrain from repeating what has already been said so we can manage the time efficiently. Next slide, please. Instructions for questions. We will pause for questions periodically throughout the meeting. You can raise your hand by selecting the hand icon above the chat window in WebEx. Or if you've joined via audio only, please press #2 on your device. Please remember to state your name and affiliation first. You may also send your question via chat to all panelists. If you need technical assistance during today's meeting, please feel free to send a chat to the event producer. Next slide, please. And from here, I will turn the meeting over to Jason Foster.
From the IPE topic. Oh, thank you. I believe I was muted, so I'll start over there. Joining today, wanted to continue this conversation topic and pull it off of the IPE agenda and make its own stakeholder discussion here. Really, the key point to this is trusted and discuss data transparency and the ability to obtain data from the CAISO in different formats for specific analysis needs. The real question here to be answered is there a way to efficiently streamline the feeding of this information and provide a central point for this data to be retrieved by various stakeholders? Today's objective, we'll discuss the data that the CAISO already provides and what location and format that it's provided in. We're seeking to better understand what stakeholders are looking for and what opportunities, benefit, and even limitations that the CAISO has of reformatting the data that has already been being published. And then we'll open up for discussion on any other ideas regarding data transparency. If we can go to the next slide, please. And some of the ideas that stakeholders have proposed thus far, kind of on a big picture standpoint here that we can dive into details as we go along, but providing data in an accessible and usable format such as Excel. We'll talk a little bit more about this as we get into the matrix review, including a summary dashboard with key metrics, again, depending on the format in which we publish the data. Including primary keys to facilitate analysis. This, again, would have to do with, I guess, how the data is published and formatted and in what format it's provided. Provide a data dictionary to define what values mean and increase data literacy. I think we can get into this. I know the CAISO's working on a data dictionary now that we may be able to publish publicly. I know Deb Levine has been leading that effort internally, and we can discuss more what those options may look like through the discussion. And then another suggestion was to have a primary key adopted across all state agencies, the ISO, CPUC, and even the CEC for all transmission and interconnection related data. And I can just say here that there are discussions going on between all of these entities and trying to determine what data can be shared and determine consistencies across all agencies here. So I'll pause here before we get into data transparency matrix and see if there's any questions, comments.
Let's go to the first question in the queue. Your line is unmuted. Please go ahead.
Susan, we cannot hear you. It's very, very dim.
How about this? Is this better?
It is marginally better. Still very difficult to hear.
I'll try and speak loudly. Just I apologize. People don't usually ask me to speak up. Okay, so my question was, and it's just an administrative question. You've got some slides here, and I saw the matrix posted on the website, but I did not see slides. So are you going to be posting these as well?
We can post them, yeah. We just didn't have them completed in time to post before the call, so we thought we would just share them here. But certainly
okay, that's okay. Okay, that'd be great. That's all I was going to ask. Thanks so much.
Sure.
Next question, your line has been unmuted. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, Jason. This is Rayanne Quadro on behalf of EDF Renewables. And I wanted to sort of interject here at this foundational point in your conversation and first say thank you so much for moving forward with this transparency effort. It's really important to a lot of stakeholders, and I think sets the foundation for efficient work as we all try to figure out how best to address the current moment in generation and procurement. I'm hoping that as we go through these, we can have a discussion about the drivers of the confidentiality and specifically get to tariff sections or specific concerns that drive that confidentiality. I'm really glad this morning in your summary here that you've opened up the conversation to say that, you know, we want to talk through these things and see where we can get to, because the spreadsheet was a little disheartening for me. I felt like there was a lot of information that just said not public or RIMS is not set up to do that. And I'm really hoping this effort is the start of a conversation to make some changes rather than just describe the current status. I'll hold my specific comments for later should it come up. Thank you again.
Sure, thanks, Rhiannon. Yeah, the data matrix is intended to identify what the CAISO currently publishes or has available in its public formats, if you will, and then identify kind of the current status, if you will. There's nothing to say that it can't change or won't change, but we haven't committed to making those modifications quite yet. And the intent of the call here is, yeah, we would appreciate hearing, I think what you're alluding to is additional ideas on confidentiality. If you're seeking information based on certain tariff sections, we'd like to hear that and understand what it is that you're looking for and thinking. All right, so with that, Yasi, if I could have share rights, I can share the data matrix. And just to confirm, you should be able to see the matrix on the screen.
We can see the matrix.
That's great, thanks, Ellie. All right, so I think best just to take our time and walk through this. I'll do my best to take notes and identify key points and comments. So we'll start here in the top section. This is the generator queue information, generally published on the queue report. Here it looks like stakeholders were looking for a number of different items, including resource IDs to be published, transmission planning study area and sub areas, partial capacity or I guess deliverability information, phase level, megawatt capacity, fuel type, technology, and service information, and then the question was, how can we restructure the Q report to include fuel type by column rather than fuel 1, 2, and 3? We did note that it was completed. It came to our attention actually just this morning or recently this week that this was completed for internal review only and internal purposes. We're currently working on how to modify the public report to include this information. So this actually should say more of in process for the Q report. So just to go down the line here, resource ID information is currently not public, and resource IDs, as many of you know, are not set up until later in the process, and as the projects get into the NRI and implementation process, and we just simply don't publish that publicly. When it comes to study area and sub areas, we do provide that information in area reports, and in fact, we talk about it further down in the transmission information. So I'm going to actually defer number 2 here until we get to transmission information. Deliverability information, I'm sorry, partial capacity deliverability status information is currently not public. I believe we also talk about that below. And then phase level megawatt and information. There's varying data between app and study and the MAPI side of RIMS, and RIMS is simply at this point not set up to report on this, nor, yeah. So let's pause there on generator queue information and see if there's any comments.
Your line is unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, Sam Bustillos with SDG&E. On the technology types, you said it was going to be getting updated, but is it going to be consistent then moving forward on which technology gets shown first? We've seen that if you have a PV and BSS or wind and BSS, it seems to, kind of flip-flop, and I'm assuming it's just based on whoever's entering that data on which one is shown as, what was type 1 and type 2. But just wondering if, as it comes out in their mixed technologies, if they're going to be consistent on how they're, what order they're shown in.
This is Jason. I don't know that answer. Does any other panelists know the answer to that?
This is Bob Emmerich. I suspect that typically plays out based on how people enter the information on their interconnection request. It's something that I've noticed in the past as well, and we could seek to standardize that, but, we can have some more discussions on that.
Yeah, that would be great. A suggestion would be to have the non-BSS type first if it was a mixed BSS and something else, and then have the BSS as the only type if it was obviously the only one. But having consistency with that would be great. As we're doing, reporting out and using the CAISO queue, it's one that we always have to go in and manually ensure that we go back and check that, okay, if this is a mixed technology, we have to manually see if we're going to be calling it a PV BSS or BSS PV, also with the wind. So some consistency there would be very much appreciated.
Understood. Sam, thanks for your input.
Yeah, and one other one that we would also like to see is on the reports, the POI location seems to vary quite a bit. Again, I'm not sure if that's based on what the interconnection customer is putting onto the application or how it gets entered into the system. But we see everything. I mean, there's, a particular POI in the SDG&E region that's shown in 4 different ways in that same report. And we definitely like to see that. I mean, we can certainly provide input on kind of the format, but if we could get to whether it comes from the grid assets group on what the POI name is, I know that has maybe a little bit more granular detail. But if we could get maybe a drop down or something that gets used by ISO instead of kind of a manual entry there. I think that it would really help to make sure that it's consistent in how we name those POIs. So another item on consistency we definitely like to see moving forward.
Yeah, excuse me, understandable. Bob, any thoughts on that? Other than, I guess, updating the interconnection request form, because I do believe that's where the data comes from, or the input comes from based on interconnection customer input when they submit the IRs.
Yeah, and that's a field I think that is automatically put into RIM. So yeah, we have some discussion about that. What options we may have related to that.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Hey there, Jason. It's Rayanne.
Go ahead, your
again.
line.
Did you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I guess I want to beg forgiveness in advance. I have a lot to say about all this, and I'm sure you're expecting as much given the presentation I did in October on this topic. Regarding resource ID, I'd like to better understand the CAISO's position that information is not public. Resource ID information is published all over Oasis and CAISO.com. The master control list, the NQC sheet, outage information, dozens of Oasis reports have the resource ID and the generator name, as well as megawatts and, LMP information and so forth. I acknowledge that bid data is confidential, but I really don't understand the CAISO's position that the resource ID, as it is related to the queue number after that resource ID is created in the NRI process, is confidential.
Okay, thanks, Rayanne.
Okay, we're not going to discuss. It's just for note-taking today.
Rayanne, I apologize. I was distracted by something on my screen and I had missed what you said. So,
Okay.
Yeah, happy to discuss. Do you mind just going over what you said? I apologize. That was my fault.
I'll try to be more succinct. Do you have a tariff-related citation to the reason that you have presented in the spreadsheet here that resource ID, as it's related to queue number, is confidential? Resource IDs are public in all kinds of different places, in Oasis and on the CAISO.com, and resource ID relationship to POI, LMP, project name, NQC, all of that information exists on CAISO.com in public ways, and all of those are interrelatable to each other with a little bit of art and a lot of elbow grease. I understand bid data is confidential, but I don't understand the CAISO's position in the spreadsheet here that putting together the resource ID and queue number after that project has entered the NRI process is confidential. And I'm wondering if you could walk through that logic for me.
So personally, I wasn't familiar with the resource ID being public in other locations, so thanks for bringing that to awareness. I guess I personally don't have a stance on this yet. Please, somebody else jump in.
Yeah, Jason, this is Bill. I mean, I think any of our confidentiality rules, and I'm not aware of any prohibition on linking queue numbers and resource IDs, but I think, to make this call productive, it's just important to remember, probably none of our confidentiality rules, are set in stone and brought down from, Mount Sinai or whatnot. They're confidential because, stakeholder processes before them have decided that they should be confidential, which is to say that, if stakeholders now believe certain things, should be public, then so be it. So, I mean, I think anything on this list, is it's something we can probably change if that's what stakeholders want. So I don't think this is all to say there's not. I don't think it'd be too productive to discuss why we think something's confidential or not. I mean, I think it'd be more helpful to hear what is the information you need and why do you want it.
I appreciate that, Bill, especially the sentiment that anything is possible. I will admit that I came here ready to defend that particular philosophy, so to hear it coming from you is a relief. And I will say, you know, someone who participates in a lot of stakeholder initiatives where some of these reports are dreamed up, and who has also, you know, worked on the side of taking items from initiative to IT and into production. Sometimes the things that go in these reports aren't thought about by stakeholders at all in the first place, or are identified through a matter of efficiency rather than ideology. So I'm not even sure some of it has been thought through by stakeholders in the first place, is what I'm trying to get to. And I really just appreciate your sentiment on that.
Hey, Rayanne, this is Bob Emmert. I'm just curious. You know, I'm sure you understand that the resource IDs are not given until, you know, just prior to a project really going into operation. So where were you thinking that you would like to see that information?
Well, there are plenty of things on the generator interconnection queue that are blank until they're filled out. So I don't see why there couldn't be a column on the queue that shows
So are you
those
thinking maybe in
relationships
the
once they
completed tab?
existed.
Are you thinking
No,
maybe
I'm thinking in the
tab?
active tab when they exist, you know, not to get too technical here, but that relationship, that many-to-many relationship as it exists in RIMS, to connect queue management module to the NRI module, certainly could be made public and just reported in a new column at the end of, frankly, all three of the tabs.
Okay, because, you know, a withdrawn project will never have a resource ID. The active ones will soon to be moved over to the completed tab if they're getting a resource ID. So you're not going to see many on the one tab. So it's really probably the completed tab that's going to have information.
I
So
don't
if that's
think
what
it
you're
is
looking
soon to
at,
be in all of the cases, Bob. You know, a project can be phased or in commercial operation for markets for months or years, or could have started the NRI process and never completed it. So, you know, that resource ID may already exist. And I think that's relevant information for stakeholders. We also talk about elsewhere in row number 6 here, showing phase level nameplate, interconnection capacity, megawatt, fuel type, and etc. for different phases of the interconnection project. In particular, I think that would help for projects that have moved back to the active tab now that they're adding storage. It's really difficult to understand exactly how many megawatts are in queue and how many are complete for those larger interconnection requests or those who are going through modification. And so that resource ID information is a help to provide clarity on that as well.
So Rayanne, this is Deb. Let's take this a little bit further down the road. So currently what ends up happening to us anyways is that the phase level information that the unit tells us in the contracting stage is not necessarily the same phase level that they give to NRI. And they can even come through the MMA process and request phases, and what they request in the MMA process is not the same as what's in NRI. So for this phase level, nameplate, megawatts, interconnection capacity, field type, technology, in-service COD date, which...
Understood, Deb. I think the NRI
which
information.
one?
Yeah, the NRI information for sure. You know, there might be some interest from a contracting perspective, maybe for an off-taker to see what's in the LGIA, but I don't think for those of us who are really just trying to, you know, make sure that we're getting things going and understanding sort of the geographical representation and how much projects are online or are coming online care much for what the phase plan is in the GIA. We're much more interested in what's already online and what's still to be coming online. You know, as we do lots and lots of analysis before we bring our carefully considered proposals to the CAISO. So with that respect, I think the NRI information is what we would prefer to see.
Okay, so the challenge with the NRI information is that the in-service date and the COD dates are the dates that are picked, so to speak, by the customer, and not necessarily the dates that the CAISO or the PTO have agreed to.
I don't even think we need to see dates. I think we just want to know, is it in service? Is it COD? Just a status.
So you want to know whether it's sync, COMEX, or COD, not
Correct.
the date itself.
Yeah.
Okay, that's helpful.
Obviously, I speak for myself, for EDF, you know, from my professional experience. So when I say we, I don't want to be too generous here, but that's my thinking on the topic. And then I have similar thoughts about the transmission planning sub-area, Jason. I know that you said we're going to talk about that later, but I think that information is in RIMS in a lot of in the FN study module, and we should consider making it public.
Yeah, thanks, Fran. Let's point out those individual items as we go down the list in the transmission section, so we can be more specific about what you're looking for there.
Did you have any more questions about the phase level request? I know that this whole chat has been sort of circular and over-encompassing of the interconnection queue, but I want to make sure that I'm addressing your and Bill's questions about the why before I close off my comment here.
I don't have anything else.
Okay, thank you so much for my comment time here. That's all I have for now.
Thanks, Fran.
Susan,
Hi.
your line is unmuted.
Thanks. Susan Schneider, Phoenix Consulting. I wanted to second what San Diego talked about as far as the POI location and also the order in which the fuel types are listed. When you're trying to do a sort on these, sometimes it is actually really hard to find. You have to do it 3 or 4 times just to make sure you get everything that needs, that you need. And I think that it would make it a lot more efficient if there was some more consistent formatting. So I wanted to second what they had said. I also wanted to talk a little about the project names. Sometimes projects change names, and so you've got the queue number there, but it might be good to actually list any former names that they might be under as well, just to make sure that you've got the right project. And the reason, and as far as I'm not sure if the NRI or the regular MMA process is the right way to put it, but the reason for wanting the phasing information and some of the PCDS information is to try and figure out what whether interim deliverability might be available. For example, if a project is FCDS, but they have a phase coming on later than some other, other phases, then maybe there's interim deliverability available. So I think there's some of these, if you step back and try and figure out, well, what are people trying to do with this information? Maybe it will be a little easier to figure out what, which exact information or what the source of the information should be. So, and it's also good to know which, as I think Rayanne said, which phases are actually complete versus which phases are not complete. And if there's any MMA requests for additional storage, for example, if that's just going to be energy only or anyway, it's just, it would, I think that will tell you a little more about where, instead of diving right into the weeds, just trying to figure out what are they trying to do with it, and then that might tell you what might work. The comment on the project names, I will probably emphasize them, or I'll just do it now, and then I don't have to do it when we get there. When we get to the transmission project, that is particularly difficult because sometimes the PTOs will change the names. You have the Lockford Lodi project and the Lodi Lockford project and the South Central San Joaquin project, and it's all, you're all talking about the same upgrades. And so I think it's real important to, have a standard format for naming projects, and then when they are changed, whether it's generation projects or transmission, some way you can trace through what was approved, say, for transmission in the earlier TPP cycle or something. I recently had a project where I had to trace all the way back to 2013, and it was just really hard because the names had been changed, I think, twice through the process. So the name changes, I think, are just another good transparency thing for transmission and generation projects, just to be able to follow them all the way through. That's all I have for now.
Thanks, Susan.
Oh yeah, hi, this is Alan.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, hi. I guess I want to go a little bit back to maybe what Bill said, is that, I mean, some of this stuff is obviously confidential now, but I don't understand why we couldn't be creating a process to maybe, unclassify some of this information. We had and I'll just point out that for a client, and it was in the IPE phase 1 comments that went in last week, we made a specific proposal that for the supercluster, to address the overheated queue, that site exclusivity information actually be made public, because I actually think that would help projects in the queue decide whether to keep going, right? Knowing how many projects in a particular area have site exclusivity. So, things that might have been confidential in the past maybe shouldn't be confidential in the future. So some of the other information that I would think could be, examined besides site control is, suspension status, whether they posted third IFS. You can kind of figure out the other IFS, whether they're in the queue or not, obviously. But I understand that, you probably need to run a process to make that public. So I just put that out there, that maybe there's time to have like a nomination comment and then, decision. You made the project name public 1 or 2 IPEs ago, so it's not like you can't do it. You just need to have a process. And then on resource ID, one thing, so if you have any feedback on that, it'd be good. I will say on resource ID that, yeah, the resource IDs are identified later, but maybe you just, on the NQC report where you show resource IDs, you show the queue number to the extent there's a queue number, right? So, you don't have to overthink this in some ways. You just, why are all those resource IDs, devoid of project name and queue number? I mean, you could link it in that report. So anyway, with that, I'll stop. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. Any other questions?
Yes, the question on the phone.
Go ahead.
Yeah, good afternoon. This is Arash Otsian with EDF Renewables. Bill, I heard comments and questions about, confidentiality. It almost feels like first we need to have a discussion around what is confidential and what's not. I mean, what's considered CEII and what's not. And just, takeaway based on the discussions that are happening, and I'm looking at what MISO SPP or even PJM provides, a lot of the information that I see here is being provided by other ISOs. Now, I was trying to better understand what is this resource ID, and the gentleman before me mentioned, the queue number, for example. I mean, MISO provides that as a source of information for for the stakeholders. So I think there's a lot of work done in the other regions that maybe we can reevaluate and revisit and see how can we better modify the information for queue related transparent data transparency and also even transmission. But it almost feels like we need to have a conversation about what's CII and what is not. Do you disagree? Or maybe that's already defined somewhere in your BPM or tariff.
Well, this is Bill. I would say I absolutely agree with the sentiment of kind of where we're trying to go. I do disagree on the steps to get there. I mean, CEII is going to remain CEII, which, and if we examine, the definition of CEII and how you make that determination, it's a wildly vague, kind of unhelpful morass that also won't get us anywhere. I would just say, as a starting position, you should describe kind of what you described earlier. Tell us what you want and why you want it that you don't already have, and then let us see if there are any, impossibilities there or any challenges. But I don't think we need to do too much examination of the status quo, really, because I think, except for like the hard line, I don't think anyone's going to actually request the things that we probably, that are obviously no's, like bid data or whatnot. Did that make sense?
Yeah, fair enough. Thank you.
And certainly like include comments, that if other ISO RTOs provide something,
sure.
That's very helpful. We're not going to take offense to that.
No, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Please go ahead. Alan, do you still have a question?
Oh, I apologize. I'll put my hand down. Well, actually, I'll make a quick comment. It's that there's confidential information, there's CEII. Let's just be clear that not everything rises to the level of CEII. There's just normal commercial confidentiality. And I would say that nothing that I identified earlier would even constitute CEII. So just, I'll put that out there.
Yeah, Alan, that's absolutely right. Oh, I guess everyone's still open. I mean, that's right. I agree. I don't think we're going to get into CEII. Also, just because something is CEII doesn't mean it's inaccessible. It's just inaccessible to people who have, leaped over certain hurdles.
Yeah, this is Robert. That's exactly what I was going to say. Practically everyone on this call would have access to CEII if they wanted it. They're all stakeholders, and I believe we give access to all stakeholders as long as you identify yourself and prove you're not, going to do anything nefarious with the information. And Bill can clarify exactly how we do it. But my understanding, practically everybody can get access to the market participant portal. That's where we put CEII data, so it's not really a barrier. I guess the other point I wanted to make is the information that we put on this matrix, on the right-hand side at least, is all already being provided.
Thank you for that, Robert. This is Rayanne again. I just wanted to point out that accessibility does not mean availability, meaning that, if the information is only accessible in PDF form or with incomplete primary keys that would be needed to put the information together in an analysis space, then it's pretty difficult to make an accessibility argument, even though it's available.
I'm not sure what the difference is, to be honest with you. I mean, we're being transparent. It's available.
Yeah, so the difference between accessibility and availability, lots of information is available, but if it is not presented in a format that's easy to take in for analysis, then it isn't accessible. And when information isn't accessible, then we, and that's a collective we, including the CAISO and the joint agencies and everyone else, can't easily bring it into our analysis. And I think, from a transaction cost perspective, all of these smart minds on the call are better served with information that's easy to use, so we can spend our time thinking about the big problems and not the small problems of getting the data into a clean set.
Rayanne, thanks. You were cutting, just so you know, you were cutting out towards the end of your comments there. I wasn't sure if you were done.
Oh, okay. I'll try one more time. I said that I think the difference between accessibility and availability has a lot to do with format, and that, can you still hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah, so
Yeah.
we heard that part of it. I didn't, so you had stopped talking. Okay. So
Societal transactions are high if we don't have it in a way that can pull it into a format that can be analyzed, so we can spend our time, analyzing it rather than putting together a clean data set. That was where my comment ended.
Sure. Understand your comment there. And I think part of this evaluation and what we could reformat and restructure on behalf of others is, an additional question of, is there also benefit to the CAISO and the internal use of that same information that we would restructure and reformat? Certainly understand that there's value in receiving information in different formats, but there's a cost and a benefit to that for all parties, right? And we have to take that, the CAISO has to take that into consideration in whether or not to be able to restructure and re-provide this information.
Yeah. And the CAISO benefits for this information is transparent and accessible, though. You benefit in the form of getting, empirical information back when we do our stakeholder comments and participate in stakeholder initiatives. And you get better information via, for example, the MMA process. If I have the information I need to support my clients, and they don't bog you down with questions that can be answered internally, right? Or they don't bring modification requests that are ultimately going to be material for clear reasons. So, I think it does benefit the CAISO, not just in, will you use it in your business processes, but in empowering your customers to be as informed as possible.
Understood. Thanks, Rayanne. All right. I'll pause there. Any other questions on generation queue information?
There's one more question.
Okay.
Miss Betty, you're unmuted.
Can you hear me okay?
Hi, yes.
Hi, this is Betty Fung from Recurrent Energy. I apologize, I walked into this a little bit late, so I'm not sure if some of the questions have already been asked, but I'll bring them up anyway. So, two questions. One, is there any interest in kind of posting the information in the same format as the new transmission capability map that AESO has just gone live with? And two, is there a general scope of how frequently this information will be refreshed? I could be way ahead, so feel free to stop me and bring that into a later discussion.
Yeah, with the availability map, I'm assuming you're referring to transmission information.
Yes. And could that be inclusive of other items that we're looking to add?
I think for me personally, I'd have to understand more about what that availability map is referencing and what's included on it. I'll have to defer to Jeff Billington and Robert Sparks on the transmission planning side of the house, probably to comment on that.
Okay.
The question was about the Alberta ISO transmission availability map. Is that the question?
Yes. Is there any interest for CAISO to have an equivalent of that, or if CAISO already have an equivalent of that?
I've never seen it before.
Okay. It just went live recently, so if it's new to me as well, so if it's something you guys are interested in checking out, I would encourage you to do so.
Great, thank you.
There are no more questions.
Okay, great. Let's shift down to the transmission information, there's a lot here, a lot of really specific nuances to each of these. Let's start at the top here. So we do in some way, shape, or form provide the information that's noted here, 1 through 10, in some format or another. And to Rayanne's point earlier, I believe the question is, can we restructure the information that's provided here into a more usable analysis type of format, such as Excel? And I don't believe any of this information is provided in Excel format. So I think rather than going line by line here, maybe we just open this up for discussion, and let's talk specifics if anybody has specifics, and go from there. Jeff, Robert, do you have anything to add before we open this up for discussion?
No, I agree with what you said, that in almost all cases, if not all, the specific information being requested is available and can be obtained. Maybe in different reports, you might have to look at different reports and summarize it yourself and that sort of thing, but it is, for the most part, available.
Thanks, Robert. Yeah, Yasi, if we can go ahead and open the line for questions and comments. We'll just start there and open for conversation.
Sure, Chris, go ahead.
Hi, this is Chris Devin with Customized Energy Solutions. Can you hear me all right, Jason?
Hey, Chris, yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, great. So I don't have a really specific question on any of the kind of information. It's more of a, I guess, a broader question that kind of just relates to the overall changes that CAISO has been trying to make on, making sure that the capability, the transmission system is more available. And so I guess I would just say, given everything that you are providing today and some of these other changes like the improved PPD allocation report process and those sort of things, do you guys feel like there is enough information being provided to try to streamline the queue enough to maybe get out some of those speculative type of projects that I think people, what we've heard is that, some developers have been putting those in to try to find areas where there would be the most available deliverability and cheapest, interconnection upgrades, those sort of things. So it's kind of, I guess, more of a this broader question than anything specific, but I just figured this would probably be a good opportunity to maybe just get some reaction, and then maybe that can tee it up for other folks that have a little bit more, feet on the ground with actually developing things to see if they have this similar feeling or not. So that's kind of my ask, and I'll stop there. Thanks.
Sure. Thanks, Chris. I'm going to defer this question to either Bob or Jeff. Robert, if you guys or anybody else that has any other thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a good question, Robert. We essentially perform the studies as the tariff requires, and we document the studies, and we provide the power flow models, the end reports that are, you add up all the area reports for each cluster, just thousands and thousands of pages. We publish or offer 30 to 40 different power flow models. There's a tremendous amount of information available. You do have to have a certain amount of expertise to decipher it. Essentially, you look at the reports, and if you have experience with it, you can get the answers you need, but you certainly need the expertise to, to make good decisions with where to put your next interconnection application.
Chris, does that help?
Yeah, I think I'm unmuted now, right?
Yeah, we can hear
you. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I hear the response. I guess to me, it's just not clear if you guys think this is actually going to solve the problem or not from that response. Unfortunately, I mean, I appreciate it that you guys believe that you're putting out all the right information, and it takes some expertise to actually be able to decipher all that and then get the result of finding the best places to provide the variety of things. But do you guys need to do more hand holding for folks that are doing these development projects and actually be able to help people identify it? I think that some of the stuff that's done now, like the transmission availability thing, where that feeds into IRP and stuff like that, is helpful, but I don't know if that necessarily translates down all the way into the final siting level where folks are deciding where to do interconnection requests at. And so I just think that seems to me to be the biggest challenge with all these additional resources and procurement orders trying to get everything through. So I just wanted to, get a sense of if you guys think you basically are done with any enhancements needed for that, or if you need to do more work there to try to get a better outcome, basically.
Well, I mean, I think we're just trying to be transparent, and there are other parts of this ITE process that are more focused on making sure the right projects move forward and the wrong projects get out of the way. But we're just trying to be transparent in this discussion, I think.
Okay, you know what? I think that helps a lot, Robert, actually, to pull that aspect into this as well, and just to keep that in mind. So I'll stop with that. That helps. Thank you.
Chris.
Sam, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I was just wondering if one of these columns, like column G, I know there's some mention in row 17 on transmission forums. Is the column G representing the transmission development forum in which we're providing updates to this? And is that what this is meant to capture? Just see transmission project status reports. I just want to make sure that that's the development forum reports we're putting out.
Yeah, well, there's various reports that come out. The different PTOs have different processes, and some of them have very long names. But yes, this is meant to capture the new process that was created, as well as any of the other reports that are still required to go through the CPUC.
Okay.
Yeah, it's Jeff here. Just to echo that, yeah, that's reflecting what we kicked off in January, and we'll be having quarterly updates of those posted on our website and a quarterly stakeholder call.
Okay. Thank you. Just wanted to make sure I was clear on what these ones were representing.
Sam, was that all?
Your line is.
Thanks. This is Bridget Sparks with AES Clean Energy. So I have a few questions. First, and I don't think this is in the spreadsheet, but it was in the paper, is putting together a list of what POIs and equipment are owned by which entity. So I know in the paper you have a process to streamline if an interconnection customer is identifying a POI that's not actually controlled by the ISO, and a way to transfer those. But it would be really helpful to even have to avoid going through that process if we could make more available, at the very least, what is owned by the CAISO, so that folks are better able to identify which process they should be participating in. Next is, AES would continue to see more transparency on the TBD deliverability and identifying, again, where there's headroom. And so I think in this spreadsheet, there definitely is information there to kind of take steps towards that, but to the extent that we could figure out ways to maybe streamline that and figure out if there's different data dashboards or something that could help customers more easily put those pieces together, I think that'd be really helpful. And then lastly is wondering if there is the possibility for more advanced posting of the base cases before each queue application opens. So we were looking, and it seems like the base cases come out in the March timeframe, but applications are due in April. To the extent that developers could have more time with the base cases in preparing their applications, I think that could also provide improvements. Thank you.
Thanks, Bridget. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Robert. Robert, go ahead. I was just saying each item.
That was a long list.
Yeah.
Hi, this is
Well,
Susan Schneider, Phoenix Consulting. Can you hear me? I thought they just unmuted me. Okay, sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just wasn't sure what was going on there. Okay, I just had a few questions. The number 8 was something that, or I guess it's line 21 on the matrix, but that was something that LSA put in, and that was driven, and I don't think it's actually in any of the reports that are here. Even though it's checked, those boxes are checked. What we were trying to figure out is within a particular cluster, it seems like there are some projects that can be accommodated when an upgrade is triggered because it may be needed for the entire cluster, or it may be triggered by the cluster altogether, but it isn't needed for every single project in it individually. So, for example, the recent San Diego issue where they had identified a bunch of circuit breakers that needed to be done. The first thing that happens is, okay, so everybody's COD gets delayed. And so first of all, the interconnection agreements have to reflect usually what's triggered by the entire cluster, even though some projects can be accommodated without perhaps 1 or 2 upgrades that might be triggered by the cluster as a whole. And everybody's COD gets delayed because of that. So there's 2 issues here. One of them is just transparency in the information that allows you to know that if you're one of the, and I believe the way they normally do it is by COD, but to know which projects in a cluster could actually come online without needing some upgrade or more than 1 upgrade that's triggered by the cluster as a whole. And then the second is to potentially allow the COD for those projects to be earlier than the full duration of all of the upgrades for the entire cluster. So I think on number 8, you really cannot find out from any reports, any study reports or anything else, how much within a cluster, how much that cluster could come online early or earlier than perhaps of having to wait for all the upgrades to be done. So we would like more information about that, say in a phase 2 study or something like that, instead of, and I don't think it is in any of the reports that are checked here. So that's my first comment.
Can I jump in before you keep going?
Absolutely.
On that? So we do provide an operational type study, which I'm sure you're familiar with. So that's what we were referring to in terms of as the projects come online year by year, the generation projects and the transmission projects, which generators can actually come online. You usually do a cluster by cluster, but you're actually getting into within each cluster, so like project by project itself. That's a fairly fine level of granularity. When we have 14 clusters, there's quite a bit of granularity already doing it cluster by cluster.
Right.
But we do.
I understand.
That's what we were referring to.
Yeah. Well, for example, the recent San Diego situation, it turned out that I think there were, I apologize, these are probably not exactly the right numbers, but but there were several projects that were involved, and it turns out almost all of them could come online without having to wait for the more recently identified upgrade. And so it was so, on the one hand you go, oh my God, everyone's, delayed 3 or 4 years. But on the other hand, it really was only maybe 1 in 5 projects that were actually delayed because everyone else really could come on before. So, again, I'm not saying you have to do this for, I guess what I'm looking for is just a little more transparency within clusters, just where there's say the longest lead time upgrade or something like that, to see so people can know if it's possible to come on early, and then perhaps even reflect that in their CODs and their GIAs. But otherwise, there's just no way to know. I mean, it was a big hullabaloo, but then it turned out that 4 out of 5 projects didn't have to wait for the new upgrades anyway, and so it turned out, I wouldn't say it was a non-event, certainly not for project number 5, but it was it just would be better to have more transparency about that. And then for people to know, if you delay your COD, for example, you may end up at the back of the line, and then you do have to wait. So again, it's sort of a general request, and I don't have, I think you guys will have to think about how to best do this, but it would be it would be nice to have that kind of transparency within a cluster. In particular, if small upgrades trigger an upgrade, or small overloads trigger an upgrade that then gets sort of tarred over the entire cluster, and CODs get delayed, everything is affected, even though everything really doesn't have to be affected. So that was the main driver for that request. That was one of our requests from the workshop. So anyway, if you could think about that and how that could be provided. Obviously, we don't want it to be a huge onerous thing, but at the same time, is it really necessary to be delaying multiple generation projects when upgrades are not really needed for those projects? And particularly with something like that, where it's discovered late, that analysis could be done perhaps in that situation. So anyway, that was the first thing. Should I go on to the next thing?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, that's all right. No, don't. No apologies. But okay, so the transmission capability report. I think the number 10 there was also another was an LSA thing. We had originally tried to go into that report, and it looks to be a report that says, here is, if you invest this much money for this particular upgrade, here's how much additional deliverability you get. And we had always thought that was the reason it was provided to the CPUC, so that it could all that information could go into the Resolve model, and Resolve would do all of its optimization that it does and decide, including that information, where resources would be most beneficial, or optimizing it. And as it turned out, there was some vague things that came back saying, well, it's not really all the upgrades, and maybe it doesn't have all those things in the local area, and maybe it doesn't have, it's not really, basically you couldn't necessarily use it for that purpose. So if there's any way that report, for number 10, if that report could be modified to actually be used for that purpose, it would be really a useful thing to have, or if that information could be provided in some other way. I think that we've been all really struggling with how to get these upgrades approved for, going forward when they take more than 10 years. And you guys have done a good job, looking at the 20-year outlook, but there's a gap between the two still, and we'd like to be able to look at low regrets kinds of upgrades to see if they could at least work could be done on them, but first they have to be identified. And so anyhow, that's the nature of number 10. Again, if there's a different report that could be provided, if that report could be updated or upgraded or something, that would be helpful. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about, because I didn't understand the heading, the last column heading, approved TPD allocation report, or new supplemental report to the phase 1 study. And I could not figure out why you would be supplementing the phase 1 study when the TPD allocation report is after the phase, it comes from after the phase 2 study. Anyway, could you just explain the heading of that column and why you'd be referencing the phase 1 study?
Yeah, so we did actually, I don't know if you've seen the 2022 TPD allocation report.
Is it out?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's on the market participant portal.
Okay. By the way, it'd be good to get a market notice when that's out next time. Thank you. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the process is, but it's out there. I think the customers that participated in the TPD allocation were notified, but I don't know about the other notification process.
Yeah,
but
it's a more general interest for that. So anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, no, you're right, and we are pointing to that as general information for everybody. And my point being, though, is that we did expand that report with the time that we had. We took some extra time to expand it and added pretty much all the constraints that were in the transmission capability report. We tried to also address in the TPD allocation report. In previous TPD allocation reports, we were only providing the area constraints that were binding, and we had allocated everything. But we tried to include all of them that were in the transition capability report. It turns out a lot were nested under bigger constraints, and so I guess you'll see when you look at it. So the reason we talked about an improved phase 1 study is because the phase 1 study has the most generation in it, and so therefore it has the most area constraints being identified. And in our analysis, we can see these constraints being binding, and so they come out of the output reports. Essentially, if your constraint is not binding, it doesn't show up as visible in your results, and you have to artificially add more generation to get the thing to be binding. And so the phase 1 reports are just the most convenient because it gives you the information that you need in order to determine how much generation behind it can be deliverable, and how much of that generation already has been allocated deliverability. The various data points that we try and provide comes out readily when the constraint is binding. And if there's not enough generation to make it binding, then we don't see anything. It's basically invisible. So that's why we were pointing to the phase 1. In fact, that was part of the reason with, trying to get it in the TPD allocation report, because the TPD allocation study itself doesn't have nearly as much generation as a phase 1 study or even a phase 2 study, actually. So that's why we added that language.
Okay, but if it turns out that the phase 1 study, so what people want to know is, for the areas that are where you don't have a binding constraint, how much is left? And so what you're saying is that you look at the phase 1 study where there was a lot more generation, and if there's no constraint there, then you know at least that much is left. But what you don't still know is really how much is left, because there could be some beyond that, right?
Well,
am I going the right place on this?
Well, when we talk about how much is left, I'm assuming what is most useful information is how much is left that has not already been allocated. And in a phase 1 study, there should be a lot of generation in that study that does not already have deliverability. So even though the constraint is binding, there should be a lot available, even though it is still binding.
Okay, let me try again. Okay. If you look at the it sounds like what you're trying to do is try to avoid a situation where the constraint's not binding, then you have to add more, and well, if it's still not binding, then you have to add more, and then you have to, then if you trigger it, well, then you have to back off a little to see how much there is, or something like that. Okay, so you're trying to use it sounds like you're trying to use the phase 1 study as sort of a proxy or some way to figure out how much might be left, because if it's binding, when you use look at the phase 1 study, that'll give you some idea of how much might be left. But then I guess first of all, is that right?
Generally, yes. But the other part is, just because it's binding doesn't mean there's nothing left. There may be nothing left for generation in the queue, but that's not the way the California ISO interconnection process works anyway. We do the studies and we identify what's binding for what's in the queue, but then we do a different set of studies for what's binding based on the TPD allocation, and those are two different amounts of generation. And the difference between the two basically is what's available.
Okay, I'm not getting that one, but I guess I will think about that and not take up any more of your time on that. But I mean, I understand the TPD allocation. You use the TPD that's, well, I guess I'm not stopping. I'm continuing. But the TPD allocation report, I know you're using the TPD, what's available based on the TPP. So how is it that phase one comes into that? I guess I understand how you would use the phase one study in the interconnection studies, and I understand how you would. The TPD is looking at the TP transmission plan deliverability. But how, well, anyway, okay, I'm going to stop now. I really am going to stop. And because I'm not quite following, but these are probably stupid non-engineer questions. So I will stop and give that and listen some more. Thank you.
Well, yeah, I apologize. I'm probably not explaining it very well, but the other point I can make is that the transmission capability report is based on phase one studies as well.
James, please go ahead.
Yes, James Mearns, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, I'm with Northern California Power Agency. We represent 16 members across Northern California. A couple of questions, principally for Robert. I know that there has been a long-term transmission study that's been performed, and that has set out a set of goals, if you will, for resources to be located in principal measure in the South San Joaquin Valley, in an area where a 500 kV path to integrate that energy to the grid presently does not exist. So I guess my question is, within the present queue allocation process, is it expected that the collective demand of people wanting to integrate at that location is going to eventually drive the outcome of the build of that 500 kV project? Or what in your mind does that process look like going forward versus the present queue structure? How do we get to the state of building those additional resources?
You're talking about the 20-year plan?
Yes, I am. If that represents a state that represents an embodiment of the goals of CAISO, CARB, and the CEC, if that's our desired end state, how are we to get from where we are to there? And the only reason for my question is that I see a significant reliance upon existing points of interconnection for the fossil resources that members presently own as the low cost, no regrets swap capability from one resource to a different resource type at that location, rather than looking at where would be the optimal location of those resources relative to the need to serve load. And so in a way, what I'm asking for is, does that 20-year plan in your mind represent our desired end state? And are we moving down that path, or is there some other path we should be pursuing here?
It's Jeff here.
Yeah. Yeah, good.
It's Jeff here. In terms of the 20-year plan was looking at and working with the CEC and CPUC, CEC through the SB 100 and looking to meet the goals. What is the resources that would be required to meet the state's greenhouse gas goals as a part of the SB 100, looking out. Our assessment was looking at 2040, if you're looking in terms of the SB 100, 2045, 2050. But what resources are needed? And that was a starting point scenario that was established in large part starting from the SB 100 core scenario. And then looking at from the CECs where they were with the information from the land use based upon that resource mix that came out of that analysis. And so that's the starting point of where the resources, and the CEC is continuing to work on with regards to the land use, and they've had a first stakeholder meeting earlier this year with respect to that, and continuing through that SB 100. So that's what we're looking at. And the project you're referring to, I think of the transmission, if you're referring to the Manning substation, that was in the actual transmission plan that we approved as a part of the board approved in the March stakeholder meeting for that project to proceed. And so that's will be going under development and competitive solicitation and moving forward as a project, not waiting for projects that are, say, in the queue or triggering it, because what we've identified is there's the need for that and for the orderly development of the resources in that area.
So I guess as a follow-up question to that, Jeff, if there is a planned allocation of transmission assets in that area, and these are for ones that prospectively will be developed that don't have a queue number right now, isn't that in a way favoring those projects that are to be located in that favored area versus the ones that might be able to integrate at existing resources? The concern is you've put a plan out there that indicates that these are going to be the resources that are available for people to use for those integrations, and this is where you should locate. In a way, it seems to be unbalancing the table a bit.
Well, it's based upon, similar to the CPUC provides us portfolios that includes the land use mapping of where they're envisioning or where they're looking at for that integrated resource plan. And we plan the transmission system to those areas. They may not be, there may be people wanting to connect in other areas, but based upon the CPUCs and where they're looking at procurement for those resources, that's where we plan the transmission from. The 20-year was in a similar, taking that, looking longer term out. Where is the potential and taking into account the land, and then where potentially, and we're not approving the transmission in the 20-year transmission plan, but that was identifying what transmission would be needed for resources in those areas to be developed. And I hate to say this, but we're getting off topic of the kind of the transparency of data and kind of the matrix and where we're going down. That's the whole. Now we're getting into the 20-year. We're getting into the 20-year transmission planning process.
Jeff, I appreciate your perspective that you think it's off topic, but in a way, I'm trying to make decisions on behalf of my members about whether they're going to independently develop resources that may not fit within that framework and that 20-year plan. And so I'm attempting to understand from the standpoint of data transparency, if they have an opportunity to develop a resource that fits within the framework of available capacity, where I should advise them that those resources should be developed.
Well, if there's available capacity, and that's what we're identifying through the data that we are, and as Robert talked about in the updated TPD allocation and where that is, that information is available for what is on the existing system for capabilities.
Thank you.
Is there any other callers with questions in the queue?
One more question in the queue. Your line is unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hey, Jason, this is Abhishek. Can you hear me?
Hey, Abhishek. Yeah.
Yes.
All right. So, great discussion so far. I had a question about one of the items that was in phase 1 scope, was item 6.8 related to developers giving notice to proceed and kind of PTOs ensuring that they actually start to plan and build a grid before the resource actually comes online. So that item was discussed in a couple of phase 1 draft versions, but was subsequently moved out to this data transparency forum. I am still not able to connect the dots on how that topic pertains to data transparency forum, but would appreciate if Kaiser still thinks that we should continue discussing it here, or should that item be moved to phase 2, as we feel it's a more involved discussion.
Abhishek, this is Jason. I'm not familiar with that, so I'll have to turn to Bob or others who may be familiar with that specific section or topic.
Yeah, Abhishek, this is Bob Emmert. Sorry, I missed that. What topic are you asking about?
So this is item 6.8 in our previous draft, and it was about notice to proceed issuance from a developer, kind of triggering PTO's course of work for developing any upgrades, and these can be shared or a standalone network upgrade. I know Danielle had mentioned that this was something that would be discussed in this forum. So not sure if it's continue worth discussing right now, or should we take that as a phase 2 item and kind of keep that moving along in that process?
Yeah, actually, why don't we take that offline, because I'm not prepared to actually talk about that item at this point, but we can talk about it and determine how we want to proceed with that.
Bob, would it be best to just have Abhishek email us to specifically ask where that should be discussed and brought up? And okay. Yeah, Abhishek, if you don't mind just emailing Bob and we're happy to take that on and see where it should fall.
I will do that. Yep,
Great,
I will do that. Thank you, guys.
Okay. And I do just want to take a second and go back up to Bridget Sparks' comments with AES. I know, Bridget, you had made your comments, and then Robert and I were going to speak up. And then we proceeded on to some other conversation. But if you don't mind, we'll just kind of come back to your comments here. And Robert, I'll repeat what Bridget was speaking to, and we can speak to those items one at a time here. So her first comment was the list of what POIs and equipment are owned by which entity. And I believe that was referring to which substations and potentially even down to the equipment level are connected to the CAISO controlled grid versus the distribution system, and identifying what the difference is so that the interconnection customers know which processes to bid into to propose their projects. So does anybody at the ISO have comment on potentially developing that sort of list?
It's like a grid assets issue.
And Bob, I know there's a topic in IPE that refers to transitioning projects between CAISO and PTO interconnection study processes. I don't know if this was brought up in that discussion at all.
So I'm sorry, what is the question related to that?
Yeah, so the question was, I guess the idea was creating a list of POIs, potentially down to the equipment level, of what is connected to the CAISO control grid versus the distribution system, and so that interconnection customers can evaluate which interconnection study to bid into.
Yeah, I don't know if Steve's on the call. He's the one that is the owner of the transmission registry. I don't see him on the call at the moment.
Yes, she's not, no. Bridget, if you can add these items to your comments, and we could maybe respond to them accordingly from folks that aren't on the call right now. Hopefully we covered the transparency of TP deliverability. Robert Sparks had noted that we have an improved TPD allocation report that was recently published. Hopefully that covers that topic. And then your last comment was about advanced posting of base cases and just being able to provide those sooner than later. I don't know, Robert, if you have any comments on the timing of posting those base cases.
Well, we post them as soon as we can, and you know, all the cases we've already posted are up there. So we do post the cases around the beginning of the study process where we've modeled the generation, but we haven't usually we haven't even dispatched it, but it's at least in the case. And then after the study is done, we post the cases with the generation dispatched and with the mitigation as required by the tariff. And so, you know, generally around the beginning of the study, I didn't quite understand the part about, like, they wanted some cases before the request window. So that's obviously before that cluster. So I guess they were talking about the previous cluster-based cases and make sure those are posted before the next cluster window opens. Yeah, I suppose we can try and move faster. I don't know the exact dates of the last one, and especially now with cluster 14, things are kind of out of sync anyway. But we'll post them as quick as we can.
Thanks, Robert.
Hey, Jason, this is Steve.
Yeah, Steve, thanks. I didn't want to put you on the spot. Thanks for chiming in.
No, I was down in the attendee list, not in the panelist list. But as far as what I want to go back to what Bill said. Most everything is possible. What we need to know from the clients or from the stakeholders is for them to write in their comments exactly what they would like to see and why. I believe there is a way to put out the information that many of these folks are asking for, facilities that are under ISO control, things like that. But we need to put it out in a way that they would understand as well, not just, you know, making the transmission register public. So if we have that in comments, exactly what they would like to see, and we can definitely find out how we can do it, making sure that we don't violate any confidentiality. Does that make sense? Jason, you there?
Sorry, I was muted. I was saying, I don't know if Bridget is unmuted at this point, or if Bridget has any questions or comments to our feedback to her questions.
I will unmute her in a second. Please go ahead, Ms. Bridget.
Thank you. I don't have any follow-ups. We can definitely put this in comments and appreciate you circling back to provide a response. Thank you.
Sure thing. Thanks, Bridget. Okay, I think that's it. Yasi, is there any other hands raised or folks in the queue?
Yes. Sam, please go ahead.
Hi, yeah, Sam Bustillos from SDG&E. The item that was discussed kind of goes, oh, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Sam.
Okay, sorry. So the item that was just discussed goes back to the point or the request I was making on kind of that consistency across how the POIs are named. You know, I've seen the extracts from the grid assets team when we've been looking down to the, the granular level. And I just wonder if there is a way to add maybe the POI at the kind of the high level that's shown in maybe RIMS or the Q report, where it really just listed as, substation and voltage level, versus going down to, individual breakers, the section, north, south, west, east bus that's shown in the registry. And I think that would really help drive in being consistent in how we name those POIs. And what I'd ask is does CAISO consider you moving away from kind of the Word version that's used for the interconnection request and moving to something that maybe is a little bit more automated, or maybe is even some sort of form that gets filled out that's, web-based, in which you would have drop downs that would include the areas. Within that, you wouldn't need to, let's say if you're someone who's seeking a POI, you wouldn't need to go through, let's say, a report or some other document to figure out what the POI is. You could go to the transmission area and then use the drop down that would have all of those POIs, and it would really make it consistent across the board. So maybe I'll stop and ask about the idea of moving away from Word versions of these requests that, for us, it just ends up being a lot to try to track back through there and find all of that information, especially through MMAs, through multiple phases, through reassessments. So let me stop there.
This is Jason. Sam, your point is well made. We're certainly not in a position to shift any process, if you will, for interconnection requests and the utilization of RIMs at this point. Certainly something we could consider for the future, but don't think in the short term that's going to be a viable option, but certainly something we'll note down and consider as we move through this.
Sure. And I'm just wondering, is the reliance on the RIM system, from my understanding, it's a kind of a custom ISO built system. I'm sure that there's a lot of interactions that happen within that system, but is there not an opportunity to utilize some other maybe third-party developed software for maybe specifically on the application, or kind of the data management or file management, if there is limitations within RIMs? I know that a lot of these software developers can do syncing up between systems in order to enable this to work together. So I'm just wondering if the viewpoint is that we're gonna look at RIMs as the one and only system to utilize, or if it's going to be that you're considering expanding out to have something else synchronize or work with RIMs, so that you wouldn't have to do the changes within RIMs to try to make some of this happen.
Sure. Yeah. So this is Jason. Not familiar with any considerations to use a third-party vendor at this point. RIMs is the application that we utilize for the interconnection process and the organization of it. Understand your point, and your point is well made. And we'll certainly consider that as we go forward.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam.
Hi,
please go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Susan Schneider, Phoenix Link. I just wanted to maybe touch once more on the identifying which POIs belong to which utilities. It seems to be, at least a couple of situations that I've seen, is where you've got high voltage lines, and in this case, it was the cases I've seen is PG&E, but I would imagine San Diego could have issues too, where you've got higher voltage lines like 115 kV that normally would be ISO jurisdictional, but it turns out that they're not. They're for whatever reason they're WDAT. And one project I was working with actually went all the way through the phase 1 study at the CAISO before it was discovered that really the 115 kV line or substation they were connecting to was actually a WDAT line. And so they had to go start all over in that process. So if I think the higher voltage lines that are under the WDAT tariff, and also any lower voltage lines that you would think would be under WDAT but actually are CAISO controlled, those I think are the areas where it's not clear. And it's not just substations, it could be a line that they're connecting to in some cases, a line tap. It probably does not need to go but lower down than the substation to specific equipment, unless some of the equipment in the substation is one thing, or one jurisdiction or another. But otherwise, I think just the substation and line and which jurisdiction they go to, with a special focus on lines you might think are one thing but really are another, would be really all that's needed. I don't think it's a complicated proposal.
Yeah, thanks, Susan. I think the key there is getting to that point and getting that list together and getting concurrence. And I believe, Steve, that's what you were referring to on the transmission registry is getting concurrence between all parties of that consistent list. Correct me if I'm wrong there, Steve.
No, you're right. Just want to know exactly what they'd like to see and what format and why they want to see it. And we'll see what we can do about putting it together.
Okay. Is there anything about the why that's not clear about that?
No, I follow you.
Okay. I mean, I just want to know because I want to be able to explain it if it's not clear.
Yeah, we just got to make sure we put out the data that's understood, that can be understood, and that we don't put it out in a way that even causes further confusion. You know, there's a lot of radial systems, a lot of gen-ties and things that, you know, if you go try to drive around and find them, or if you're looking at some map that a third party put together that's not connected correctly, you may get the wrong impression of what's networked and not. And so we just want to make sure we put it out correct.
Yeah, that's
I mean,
what
we've always offered too that, you know, you can call the grid asset team at any time and ask if something's under our control. We'll research it for you and let you know. I don't think we've had the issue that you talked about in the last and recently, where we studied something in the wrong area.
Okay. Well, yeah, we would also like you to put out a correct list. So yeah, that would be nice. So yeah, if you could do that, that would be great. So thank you.
All right. Thanks, Susan. Yazzie, any other callers in the queue?
Jerry, please go ahead.
Yeah, it's Jerry Melcher, Public Advocate Office. I need to follow up with Susan on support her request, because I think what we're trying to do is get some certainty of projects and their movement through the whole process, not only, you know, phase one, stage one study, whatever, stage two, but, you know, all the way through. So the LSEs who are looking to pick up a PPA or, you know, offer PPA know something about, you know, how these projects are, you know, moving through the whole process, and a dashboard that kind of gives us a pretty good idea of whether we're meeting the SB 100 targets over time. This WDAT stuff is really problematic. I mean, for instance, you look at the Inland Empire Energy Center, which used to be, you know, a nice gas-fired combined cycle GE plant that the CAISO just allowed to be mothballed and then switched over to an energy storage project from 640 megawatts. You've got stuff in there where people are like saying, oh, I could connect to the 138 kV. Okay, that's WDAT. Not sure there's a 138 kV in that substation. But, you know, there's like 3 projects there related to connecting to that center, one at WDAT, 2 at 500 kV. And then you got a capacity issue in Albert Hill that you've been arguing about for 2009, Southern Cal Edison. We have been. Whether there's a need where we could put energy storage on 138 anywhere in that area, solve 2 problems, capacity problems for the substation, and also ISO, you know, renewable needs, or, you know, energy storage with renewable needs, support renewables, integration. And so you take ownership, you have to take ownership of the WDAT data all the way through, because I don't know what's holding up a project. I don't know if it's because Edison's got a policy, they don't want to build something that's not theirs because they know they can get their projects through faster than anybody else's, like under the emergency reliability rulemaking, which really costs ratepayers a ton of money, or, you know, what is the issues that are going on? You know, I just see that you have this, you know, generation interconnect queue list, but you don't see what's going on in the WDAT at the same time, which could be more than beneficial to the ratepayers to get, you know, that visibility to the developers. So yeah, I support you taking over everything and making dashboards available so that we can, you know, effectively make decisions or just see where there's bottlenecks keep creeping up. Because when a transmission owner doesn't want to build something, you know, and Susan's screaming her head off, you know, you guys are delaying my project. Well, I agree. So thank you for, you know, starting this process. I just don't understand where the use case process is, how we go about, you know, identifying all the needs for this activity. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Jerry. We'll just ask you to put those comments in your written comments and we'll review them accordingly.
Jerry, this is Deb Levine. The CAISO cannot take over the WDAT function because it's not underneath our jurisdiction. So we're responsible for the transmission that has been turned over to the California ISO, which is not distribution, it's only transmission. It's regulated by FERC, and the distribution that you're talking about is regulated by the CPUC. So we can't do a two-bath. You can go ahead and provide comments, but we can only be accountable for the transmission that has been turned over to the ISO.
Hi, this is Rayanne Quadra. I think my mic's open because I was in line and I do want to make a comment. Did you want to put anything else on that, Deb, before I move forward?
That's it.
Okay, great. I kind of want to make these closing remarks. Just supporting this.
Good.
Oh, somebody's on the call. This has been a really long and difficult conversation, and part of it is because the vocabulary we all speak is a little bit different. I wanted to build on Steve Reddy's comments and proposal about 10 minutes ago in terms of, you know, maybe the next step in this process is to clearly define all the variables that'll go into thinking about this. In terms of what stakeholders want, I think this list is already pretty comprehensive, but perhaps it would help if stakeholders in their comments provided what format they want the data in, how much value that data has, and what priority that data has to them. And then perhaps the CAISO could also come back with an estimate on how complex it is for them to provide the data given their existing systems, or how complex it would be to upgrade those systems, so that we can have sort of a data set for working together to identify what's most valuable in terms of outcomes. That was just my suggestion for the next steps. Again, I really thank you for having this meeting and for graciously responding to everyone's questions today.
Yeah, Rayanne, I think you have a good point there. Is we'll take the stakeholder, we'll wait for the written comments to come back. We'll take the discussion that we had today, and I think the next step would be to evaluate, you know, how complex it would be for the CAISO to take on, maybe starting with the list of items we see on the list here, and the complexity behind making these changes and implementing these changes, and providing different formatted data, and then we can just evaluate that internally first, of course, and then respond accordingly to this process.
Thanks, Jason.
Thanks, Rayanne. And if there's no other callers in the queue, I think we can turn it back over to Ellie to help close us out.
We have Sam in the line and Bridget.
Okay, sounds good. Sam?
Yeah, check. Sorry, my audio doesn't look like it's going. Am I on?
Yep. We can
Okay,
hear
cool.
you. Yep.
Sorry, one last comment request, and we'll certainly put them in comments, but is, we'd really love to see something happen on a regular basis in cleaning up the queue. And not in the fact of, I know we've talked about speculative projects. I'm not talking about that. I'm just saying if we just continue to assume all projects in the queue are real, getting dates up to date regularly. We have projects that will slide past their in-service date, their CODs, without the dates getting updated. I put comments into IEP asking for us to update project milestone dates for projects that elect to park. That was removed from it. I was hoping that maybe we're going to see that in this workshop, or maybe it's gotten taken into phase 2 on the customer allocation options form. We see that the status of GIA executions aren't always accurately reflected in the queue, especially when we have unique projects where they get added to another project's GIA. But we are trying to, to maybe Suzanne's earlier point on these operation studies, where we're trying to indicate year by year what projects are going to be able to move forward without certain upgrades. Those are provided as informational, but we use the dates that are within the queue. And as we go back and forth with ISO and looking at our list of projects and what dates we model them, we continually are getting, we need to put in the dates that are in the queue. And we know that those project dates are not accurate for especially projects that have moved past their dates that they had in the queue, especially for projects that are parked. And, us as the PTOs, we're not privy to those quarterly status reports. So we're not getting some of the information that CAISO is getting. So to the extent that between developers and ISO, between PTO and ISO, however we can do it, but to be working together regularly to update dates, statuses, technology, even to the point of adding phasing, because as I'm sure we know that projects will do phasing within MMAs and other requests. Getting that information updated on a regular basis, I think is really going to benefit everyone. I think based on the whole purpose of this meeting is for data transparency, but like they say, garbage in, garbage out. If we can't have that information regularly updated, then it really becomes not very usable. So I'd really love to see something done on a regular basis to clean up the information, and whether we have to do that project by project, but something needs to be done. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Sam. And Bridget.
Thanks. This isn't quite a data question, but more of a process to get access to the data. Some folks at AES have had trouble getting access to the market participant portal, and it took one person almost 9 months to gain access to all the TBD reports and all the stuff that's behind those access portals. And so just also wanted to kind of comment that as part of this data transparency process, are there ways to kind of streamline or refine that process so that folks can get access to this kind of data more quickly? And so just wanted to comment to also look at, are there sort of procedural steps that we could clean up so that in all this great work that we're doing and make data more transparent, if it has to be behind registration walls, then it's easier to register for those. So I just wanted to also kind of throw that in the mix as well in terms of thinking about how easy it is to get access to the data that is available currently and what that process is like. Thank you.
Is there anybody on the call that can speak to that? Yeah, Bridget,
this is
go ahead,
Steve. I think that's a valid point, Bridget, and definitely put it in your comments so it reminds us to kind of work on that as well.
Yep, agree. Thanks, Steve. All right,
We do not have any more questions. Sorry, we do not have any more questions.
Great, thank you. Ellie, I'll toss it back over to you to close us out. Thank you. Ellie, if you're speaking, we can't hear you.
Hello, can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jason. Next slide, please. For next steps, please submit comments on today's meeting discussion by April 19th using the comment tool linked on the initiative webpage. And if you have any questions, please contact ISO Stakeholder Affairs at kaiso.com. Next slide, please. Before we close today's meeting, the ISO is pleased to announce this year's Stakeholder Symposium, which will be held in person at the State Credit Union Convention Center in downtown Sacramento on November 9th and 10th. Registration for the event will be open in May, and a public notice will be issued once the site is available. Additional information is available on the Stakeholder Symposium webpage on the ISO's website. And if you have any questions, please feel free to contact us at symposiumred@kaiso.com. Thank you for joining today's discussion. As a reminder, this meeting was recorded for informational and convenience purposes only. The video file will be posted on the initiative webpage for a limited time after this meeting. We look forward to receiving your comments and have a great rest of your day. Operator, you may now conclude the call.